Cruise news time. Well, we got to continue to talk about the guidance the CDC released for cruise ships on May the 5th. I feel like they messed up. Let's talk about it. Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Lido Loca. I'm your host Tony, here with the latest cruise news updates. Well, we've been talking about the new guidance released by the CDC on May the 5th for the last couple days, and there's been some interesting questions. Questions like, how can the CDC say what the cruise ship does when it's in international waters? Or how can the CDC dictate what the cruise lines do when they're at a foreign port? There is an answer to that question, and I'll be happy to share it with you. And then I really feel like the CDC missed an opportunity here. I feel like they messed up a little bit. And we'll get into that. First of all, welcome to the show. Saturday, May the 8th. Hope everybody's having a great week. It's been a challenging week for cruising for sure. And I think we still have some challenging days ahead of us. But it's important to process through this new guidance from the CDC. And let me tell you where there was some confusion over the last few days. Well, confusion over the last week. About a week ago, the CDC came out and said, look, we're sending a letter to the cruise lines and we're saying if you cruise with a 98% vaccinated crew and you cruise with a 95% vaccinated passenger manifest, then you can skip the test sailings. You can skip the test sailings. And then we got this new guidance on May the 5th with all of these restrictions. So one of the questions that came up, how does this apply? Does this apply only to people that don't get vaccinated, or does this apply to vaccinated people? Let me pull up the CDC's chart. 4 phases, phase 1, phase 2A, phase 2B, phase 3, and phase 4. So phase 2B is the test sailing. So after that information came out that said if the ship had 98% crew vaccinated, 95% passenger vaccinated, then they could skip 2B and go directly to step 4. But you got to look at the name of step 4. It says restricted voyages. And then we got this handbook, this guidebook that I talked about yesterday. It's a guidebook, and let me throw it up here. It's the guidebook, notice the name. It's the guidebook for simulated sailings, and it's also the guidebook for restricted sailing. And so even though the cruise lines are able to skip the test sailings because of the vaccination guideline, it does land them right into this restricted sailing bucket that has all these rules like mask everywhere. And I do believe that the CDC, by applying the same rules to the vaccinated cruises as the non-vaccinated cruises in this restricted sailing period, which should last the whole distance of the conditional sail order, which expires at the end of October, I think they've made a mistake. I'm going to get into it. I'm going to get into it. Before we get there, I want to talk about how the CDC can be prescriptive about what the cruise lines do in international waters and what they do in foreign ports. And even before that, let me take this moment to invite you to subscribe to this channel. If you like staying up to date with everything that's going on in that cruise life, please consider subscribing with the notification bell on. That way you don't miss out on any of these episodes. Thank you in advance. Okay, so part of the new guidance from the CDC said that even after the cruise ship leaves U.S. waters and goes into international waters, they got to do all these things. They got to have masks. They got to have social distancing. They got to have masks if you're laying in a chair by the pool. And beyond that, the CDC said, look, you can't even allow the people to get off the cruise ship and explore on their own. You have to make sure that they do your ship excursions. You have to extend the cruise bubble. And so a lot of people said, well, how can they do that? How can they tell me what to do in Mexico? Like the CDC, how can their power extend to Mexico? So here's the answer. It's a little technical. We're looking at the Code of Federal Regulations. So there's a Code of Regulations number 42. So this is 42 CFR section 71.1. You'll see this referenced in a lot of the materials from the CDC regarding the restart of cruising. And in that, it contains this term, controlled free pratique. Now, pratique is a port term. It's used for ports of not only like airports, it's used for seaports. And the idea of pratique is this. Vessels that come to the United States through sea or through air, of course, we want them to be free of disease. Now, it's interesting when it comes to ships. I don't know if you know this, but there's a whole nautical alphabet that are represented by flags. And the solid yellow flag is the letter Q in the nautical alphabet. But if a ship comes to port flying the yellow flag, it is applying for pratique. And what it's saying is, I would like you to come on board and make sure that our ship doesn't have any disease, any infection, so that we can use your seaport. So this happens in shipping, vessels of all kinds of size. It is this concept that before the United States allows a vessel to bring people into the country from outside the country, that the ship is free of disease. And you have the word free to pratique, and that means that the government extends the idea that your ship doesn't have disease just based on how you're managing the ship. And then you have the word controlled onto free pratique, and that means that the federal government can add policies and procedures to how that ship operates outside of U.S. waters, in foreign countries. It can add procedures and check those procedures, and if those procedures are not checked, then they can be denied entry into the port. It also happens for airplanes also. So if you remember, the mask mandate came out for airplanes, I don't know how many days ago, but maybe January, February. And they use this concept of free pratique in the airport language also. And so basically what they're saying to foreign airlines is that if you don't require mask on your flight to the United States, we will deny you entry into the United States. So they were able to overlay the mask policy onto a foreign company traveling into the United States airplane by using this concept of free pratique. So, I'm not agreeing with it or disagreeing with it, but I'm just saying there is a federal regulation out there that can deny or allow entry into the seaport based on whatever the government says that entity has to do so that they can gain that access. So yes, these guidelines that were put out in the handbook for restricted sailing, those are a form of controlled free pratique. And you notice, if you read through that, I left a link for you yesterday, they talk about how there will be CDC inspectors that just pop up on cruise ships unannounced. That is what they're checking for. Are they doing the things that the CDC requires so that they can, enjoy that free pratique, that free ability to come into the United States? It's complicated, but I just wanted to show you that the chain of authority is there, that the CDC can be prescriptive as to what happens on a cruise ship in international waters and in foreign ports. Hopefully that all makes sense. We can obviously talk about that in the comments, but let me tell you where I think the CDC has messed up with this May 5th guidance. Right now, the big push in the United States is for vaccination. The health officials, the mainstream health officials, the CDC, the WHO, they believe that vaccination is our path out of the pandemic. And in the United States, there's been a heavy push to get the population vaccinated. Now, what we see is there is a strong vaccine hesitancy in the United States. And so where it was thought that at some point we could get to 75% or 80% of the population vaccinated, we see now that with this vaccine hesitancy, that may not be true. And so the CDC continues to beat the drum that if we get vaccinated, we can get out of this pandemic. And the closer we get to 100% vaccinated, the more we're going to, turn the corner. They started to use this phrase in their narrative, turn the corner. And really in the last few days, what we've seen is the CDC and the administration talking about the trend line going down on hospitalizations, the trend line going down on cases, the trend line going down on deaths, and that possibly as we enter into July, those numbers will really go low and we could be out of the woods. And that's really why they continue to beat the drum. Get vaccinated so that we can get to this place where we are getting close to back to normal. And so this is where I think they messed up when it came to the cruise lines. They didn't mandate a vaccine, but there is one cruise line out there, Norwegian Cruise Line, that said, look, we will cruise with 100% vaccinated crew and we will cruise with 100% vaccinated passengers. And to me, if you want to combat vaccine hesitancy, what better story would there be to let a cruise ship go out with 100% vaccinated crew and 100% vaccinated passenger? And even if it's one ship or even if it's just two ships, remove all these crazy restrictive guidelines that came forth in May the 5th in that guidance and let them go out there. Because what's going to happen is once we get to June, once we get to July in the United States and those numbers really go low, the CDC, they're going to remove the mask mandate on some level. They're really going to start to open up society because they're going to celebrate. They're going to say, look, the vaccine did what we thought it was going to do. Hooray, hurrah, let's get back to normal. And so to me, this was a great opportunity to allow the cruise companies that want to cruise vaccinated to demonstrate what they're talking about. What better way to prove your point than to actually do something that proves your point? And so, you know, it's interesting. I guess it's risky, right? The CDC, at the end of the day, they don't find cruising safe. They've never wavered from that message that they believe that cruising is a unique type of travel, different than any other pieces of travel. And they've never wavered from the message that they believe that cruise ships are a place where viruses incubate and spread easily. And they've never wavered from the idea that cruising is unsafe. So they're holding on to that in all this language, and that's why we have these restrictive guidelines. But I think it would be a great experiment to allow like Norwegian Cruise Line to do 4 or 5 fully vaccinated cruises to prove out that vaccines work, and do cruises without these restrictions, do fully vaccinated without mask, and see if there's an outbreak on board. And I would say that anybody that gets on those cruises, they would need to sign a waiver and say, look, if there's an outbreak, they're going to quarantine us and I'm not going to be able to go home. I think the CDC should have allowed something like that to really make the case, because they could have held up a sign at the end of that and say, look, get your vaccine. We put people on a cruise ship, a bunch of strangers, they were fully vaccinated, we took away all the restrictions, and nothing happened. And they would know at that point, and they could use that as a positive example. So I think that they missed it there. CDC, I don't know. I hope you're listening. I think you have a really good chance to prove out the vaccination by allowing fully vaccinated cruises and saving the kind of the harsh restrictions for non-vaccinated cruises, and let that prove out in its own ways. And so, look, I'll throw the question over to you. Do you feel like the CDC, they've missed an opportunity to show the value of the vaccine by not allowing a fully vaccinated cruise? And do you get the concept of pratique? Do you understand why the CDC does really have some sort of way to control what happens in international waters and foreign ports? Hope all that made sense. Thank you so much for watching the show today. Please hit the like button or I will cause the AsiaPod to malfunction on your next cruise. This is Tony for Lido Loca, and until the next time, we'll see you on the Lido. Bye.